Hello, my name's Robin Vincent and welcome to Surface Sessions here in a dazzlingly sunny Norfolk. Today we are actually going to look at a piece of software designed for touch. I know, I can't believe it's taken me this long. So sit back and get those fingers ready as we deep dive into version 2.1 of OpenLab's Stagelight.
Stagelight 2.1 is here, and full of powerful new features, social connections, and audio effects.
The first thing to understand that this is not an app. It's designed to look and feel like an app. It has in-app purchasing and very much follows the app sort of business model, but it's a desktop program, and that's very, very important. Modern Windows apps in Windows 8 sort of run in their own ecosystem and are restricted in what other things on the computer they can play with. They can't use non-Windows drivers like ASIO, and they can't pull in VST plugins or interact with other bits of software. Stagelight, on the other hand, being a desktop program, fully supports ASIO drivers and multiple ins and outs. It supports VST plugins and VST Instruments. And this capability projects it out of the kind of the fun app arena into the realms of things like Cubase and Reason and Ableton and Sonar, but for only $10. So perhaps it doesn't have the intensity of those other programs, but maybe it does. I don't know. Do you know? I don't know yet. Maybe we'll know in a minute. Let's have a look. Before we can even start, we've got to get over an annoying technical glitch, which is this. The interface is screwed. The reason for this is that Stagelight uses a new OpenGL API, which brings kind of advanced graphical acceleration performance, that kind of thing. But the Surface Pro 3 does not yet have that driver, or at least at the time of filming. Now, Microsoft are in the middle of producing a driver for this, and that will be coming along soon. OpenLabs, thankfully, have produced a little app which allows us to turn off the new API and use Stagelight normally. So you just download a little app and it'll actually turn OpenGL off, click exit, run Stagelight. Ta-da! And it's fine. Okay, great, let's move into Stagelight. Let's open up a demo song. So this is your timeline interface, your standard kind of track list of stuff and stuff going on here and all this mess in here. And this is the usual place where you'd make music. That's all you got in version 1. With version 2, they introduced the Loopbuilder, which is this view. This is a bit more like Ableton Live, a bit more like Bitwig, a bit more like that kind of loop-based, clip-driven thing. So I can just hit a column and it'll all play the loops back. In that kind of style. The interface is very clear, it's very Tron-like, kind of beautiful and glowing in a very modern way. I love it. Everything is laid out brilliantly for touch, because you need to get your fingers on everything. You've got this toolbar down the side, which we'll come to in a minute, and things at the top. There's very little in the way of cascading menus or hidden stuff or sort of complexity that you've got to dig around to find. It's all there on the screen, more or less. And as this is a kind of a finger-friendly thing, not really going to use the pen. The pen's become a bit redundant. I mean, obviously you can still interact with the software with keyboard and mouse and pen. That's fine, you can do that. But I'm going to try to concentrate on the fingers, as that's what most people are going to be using it with. Great, so let's load up a blank song, new song, there we go, and get stuck in. Well, first of all, it loads up with a drum track and the rhythm editor already open. This is like an analog style pattern creator for their own drum kits. But let's close this for a moment and have a look at what sort of tracks are on offer. You can add an audio track. Audio track's good for mics, instruments, that kind of thing, and singing, playing. So an audio track, or also for dropping samples on. There's also an instrument track. An instrument track directs you to the instrument browser, where you have a list of your Stagelight instruments, but also gives you access to VST plugins. Let's just add their key instrument. There are some basic controls available on each track, solo mute, automation, some I/O level, which you can see going up here. But beneath this, or behind I suppose, this secret sort of special green arrow here, this reveals kind of an inspector panel which gives you a lot more information and control over each track, and essentially it's the same for each one. You've got the name at the top, you can rename it, you can also copy entire tracks and paste them again. You've also got access to the track I/O there. You have a fader knob for level, solo mute buttons, record enable, monitor, which is more important on the audio track than it is anywhere else, pan, and you've got this natty little filter thing here, which is a high pass, low pass filter. I love that. It's awesome. It's a great little thing to have, just to have in there on every single track. Then you've got your instrument and audio effect loader, where you can access the, you can bring up the editor panel for your VST instrument or included instrument, and you can also delete that and add a different instrument. Audio effects, similarly, you can add the included Stagelight ones, like so, a bit of a chorus, or you can add VST effects as well. And that's available for each track, every track. They're all more or less the same. If you wanted to duplicate a track, you can do that very easily by tapping at the top and going copy, and then when you go to plus track down here, you get an additional little one that says paste track. Ta-da! And you get exactly the same again, which is a nice feature. I like that. You can also route out to external MIDI. However, it's not particularly elegant, because what you have to do is add a track. You then have to choose which track you want. There isn't an external track option. So we'll choose the instrument track because that's going to be MIDI, but we still have to select an instrument. We can't load up one that's empty. We have to select an instrument. Okay, let's go for the bass guitar on this, in this particular instance. And now if I want to route it out to an external synth, I go to the track I/O properties, I go down here, external MIDI output channel, and select that there. But I would still hear the bass that's already here, so I either have to mute that track, or I can tap and hold and delete that plugin. So now there's no longer an instrument in this track, and I can use it as an external one. So as I say, not particularly elegant, but it does work. And you can also do it with the drum track as well. So you can use the pattern creator view, the rhythm pattern thingy, on external stuff, which is pretty cool. I like that a great deal. Sequencing in the timeline is dead easy. You select your track, you hit record, there's a metronome or not. And you record. Haha, it's that easy. I can then change the length of that or position it around in the timeline. At the moment I've got all the grid stuff on. Double tapping gets me into the piano roll, your standard piano roll editor, where you've got your keys on the left and all your notes over here. Let's zoom in a little bit so we can see what's going on. I can tap and move notes around. If I go to my paint tool, I can add notes, like so. The size of the note is depending on the grid size here, so I can bring that down to, say, 1/4, and then we've got bigger notes. I can also tap and pull in order to create longer notes, like so, and I can tap to remove notes. So the interface, it is very simple, very touchy, and sort of works. For more sort of interesting tools, for instance, if I select a bunch of notes, I can go over here and I've got a copy option, copy. I can then press paste, and then I tap where I want those to go. You see? So it's slightly different to what you'd expect. So I can copy, then I press paste, and then I tap where I want those notes to go. There's some other options as well. I've got split, so I can select a note and split it like so, split it in half according to the grid, or if I take the snap off, it can be a bit more freeform than that. And I've also got a delete button and a cut button. The lasso select is slightly different in that you can select notes by tapping on them, whereas the regular select, once you've selected a note, the rest are deselected. Does that make sense? I don't know why it's called a lasso, because to me that's a lasso and that works on both options. Do we care? No, not really. Okay, the one thing that's missing is a controller lane at the bottom, which is a little strange. I mean, particularly for velocity, because velocity editing is something that's very common. However, this had me fooled for a little while until I discovered there's another little green arrow. We tap that, then suddenly a bunch of other controls appear. So let's select a single note. Ta-da! And here we have velocity. Let's zoom in on this note here. So there's the velocity control, and as I bring that up and down, you can see that the intensity of the color changes. It gets duller and brighter. Now that's kind of beautifully subtle, which is fine, but you know, in this kind of interface, subtlety is not that helpful. I would like that to be far more colorful so I can see that better, but it's there. So I select a different note and I can change its velocity. I can also select a bunch of notes and change their velocity together, like so. So, you know, that works. You've also got a movement tool, so I can move it very accurately, left or right. I've also got a start and end point option, and I can also knock it about with these arrow keys here. I've got octave up and down buttons, and I've got a quantize strength button. So some good, decent depth to the editor in that little panel there once you've selected your note. Other things in this editor, you've got automation. I can tap add new automation. I may choose, let's go for mod wheel, and then I can add dots to it and move the modulation around like that. There's no sort of curve or freehand options. It's purely a straight line with dots on it, but it's certainly there, and I can and you can sort of see it grayed out in the background, and I can add more and more to that. And any of the parameters available on the synth that's loaded, whether it's a VST instrument or an internal one, is available under the automation. So I've got tons and tons and tons of stuff here. I can go for LFO frequency. I can stick that in and change that around, etc. It's all there, very easy. And if this is not accurate enough for you on your fingers, well, then get your pen involved or get your mouse and keyboard involved, you know. The other option is the key lock. Now, key lock is a very interesting function in Stagelight, which is available from this big key button up here. And what this does is locks the MIDI input to a certain key or mode. So for instance, I've locked it to the key of C, and I can stick it to pentatonic. And now if I bring up the on-screen keyboard, it's changed from, let me show you if I turn that off, a regular keyboard to a pentatonic keyboard. Isn't that nice? So you no longer have to enter any bad notes at all. You can constantly be playing exactly what you mean to, which, you know, sounds a bit fruity, but is actually really handy. But this is also applicable in the piano roll. So if I turn it on in the piano roll, you see that certain parts of the keyboard have now disappeared, leaving only the notes that are applicable to the pentatonic scale. So when I try to add further notes, I can only do that, use my paint tool, within the confines of that scale. Let's try to make this a bit simpler. Let's delete that. Let's add a simple region and show you what I mean. So I can just stick in and take my paint tool. Let's move up here a little bit. And then I have similar tools in the timeline where I can copy, I can paste wherever I want it to go. I've also got a duplicate button, which is pretty cool, and a split button so I can split bits in half. There's one thing I would like to see in the piano roll, which is when you're using this kind of pentatonic scale or one of the key lock things, that rather than seeing the piano roll with gaps in it, why can't this keyboard here, which makes complete sense, go here? Or at the very least the ability to switch between the two. Drum tracks then. Drum tracks are particular to their own internal drum kits. You have the instrument loader thing over here, but you can't do anything with it, you can't change it or anything. So it's stuck on their own drum kits, which is alright, I guess. Let's have a look. So let's open a pattern and go into the editor. You've got a whole bunch of drum kits here covering all the usual bits and pieces. So looking at your rhythm editor here, it does exactly what you imagine it would. You tap in your bits, your snare, like so, and it runs as a loop. Oh, let's get the loop in the right place. You can, of course, tap wherever you like to create your patterns, and you can create wonderful patterns in this sort of way. You can change the size of patterns between 1 bar and 8 bars. You can easily clear rows or clear the whole lot. But they have a new and quite innovative little function called autofill. Now autofill sounds rubbish. It sounds like it's going to come from some kind of Casio home keyboard where you hit the autofill button in order to take you to the next verse of some busking hit you're playing. But that's not what that is. Autofill in here is the ability to stick a load of notes in with kind of the minimum of effort. So for instance, if I tap on the kick and pull a little bit to the right, kick drums appear. If I go to the hi-hat, for instance, tap and pull to the right, I've suddenly got a bunch of hi-hats in. If I tap, say, over here on the snare, I can pull a couple of in. Maybe I'll stick a separate clap in. Maybe I'll do something on the ride over here. Can I put in triplets? Yeah, I kind of can. Let's see what that sounds like. Okay, now we're talking. So autofill is the ability to auto fill up a particular row in the pattern rhythm editor thingy here, which is really awesome. I love it when somebody comes up with something innovative in an area which you think has been done to death completely. I mean, in a piano roll or in something like this where it's been there for hundreds of years, so it feels, and yet you can come up with something that's a little bit new. I mean, obviously it's not that exciting, but as a tool to help you put down the bare bones of patterns, it's really, really very cool. So yeah, I like that a lot. Now we should, of course, before we go any further, look behind the magic green button, because we might find interesting things, and indeed we do. First of all, you've got to look at the sample, which is nice, and you have some individual controls over that sound. You've got the gain of the sample to start with. You can also, let's play it from here, you can also tune it. You've got your low and high again, which is to do with your filter. It's like having your filter over there. You've got a low and a high pass. Like so. You've got pan, you've got choke, which I can't remember what that does. And also you've got an effects button here, so you can add more effects to an individual drum sound. So you can individually affect and tune each of the individual parts within a drum kit and create your own custom drum kit, because I can also replace that sound with one from anywhere else. So let's go to, there's a kick drum I wanted. Let's go for that one, whatever that one is. Nice. So there's some really nice depth to there. However, they're only one sample deep, There's no velocity layering as far as I can see. And talking of velocity, it's actually treated very differently here than it is in the piano roll. Here you can tap and pull on each individual hit, note, pad, whatever that is, whatever these are, and change the velocity very, very easy and quick like that. It's also a lot more colourful than the piano roll. But there's another weird thing down here, that there's a kind of an automation looking button, which if you tap that, you'll find you've got a velocity editor and also a pan editor. Let's check out the velocity editor. Oh my goodness, look at that. I've now got a little velocity editor. Now why the heck is that not available in the piano roll? To make it even weirder, if I go back to here, you've got this button here called Note Edit. Now this switches the view between a more of a sort of piano roll note view and then this kind of pattern view. So again, why isn't that available in the piano roll? If you're a user of a previous version of Stagelight, you may notice that there's a certain thing missing, a certain thing called the step sequencer, which was a version of the instrument track that had kind of this kind of grid going on rather than the piano roll. Now they've taken that out, really for reasons unknown. I think perhaps they're kind of working on it because it wasn't brilliant. It had a lot of things missing from it. The pitch map seemed to be weirdly upside down, but a step sort of matrix style sequencer is a really useful thing, and I thought it was quite a key feature of version 2 of Stagelight. And it seems to me that the drum track and the instrument track both kind of share the sort of functionality that Step Sequencer had, but it's not really accessible in the right places. So the drum track has this great tap to pull velocity, it has this awesome velocity editor, and it has the ability to swap between kind of a fixed grid and a more notey based one. However, I want that functionality in the piano roll. I want to be able to use that on synth sounds and instrument sounds, because you can create very interesting things with matrix sequencers that you perhaps wouldn't have thought of using a piano roll or recording in from a keyboard. So Open Labs, if you're in there, I very much like that functionality back. I would like it fixed and working really well, but I think you've almost got it. If you could combine the functionality of those two, it would become a very awesome and creative way of entering and editing notes. One other thing that's missing in version 2.1 that used to be there in version 2 was the ability to save and recall patterns. So once you've created your pattern in the drum editor, there was a button that enabled you to save that, and then you could embed it in the track up here. It was a bit clumsy, it kind of sort of worked and it felt like it needed some polish, but particularly with the autofill thing, it's so easy to mess around and create variations that it would be awesome to have a little button to go boom, save that one, boom, save that one, boom, save that one, and then be able to pull those out and rearrange them later. And so I believe things like that are going to come back, and I think it's really important that they do, because particularly with the awesomeness of autofill, you need the ability to save patterns. So is that the drum track covered? Yeah, I think so. Right, let's talk about the included instruments. You get 5, or there's really 2, but they present themselves as 5. You get an electro synth, which is kind of an analog style synthesizer, and you get a bunch of kind of acoustic instruments together called electric bass, electro guitar, electro keys, and electro organ. And these are available as a pack from the store. You get like a basic version available for free in the software, but you don't get access to all the controls. To get all the controls and all the sounds, you then have to spend a few dollars to acquire them. But let's have a quick look. The bass, it's all right. You got a fingered bass and you got a picked bass, and you have a bunch of controls. The free controls are these ones here, where you essentially get access to a filter and a few effects. When you pay for it, you also get access to LFOs and more access to the effects and all that kind of business. So you can get all the filter going everywhere. The guitar, there's a really nice Telecaster sort of sound in there, which I just love. I should be playing it on here, of course. Turn me what's it back on again. So yeah, and similar expanded controls in there. Obviously the tremolo is going on with the LFO. That's nice. We can swap that for the keys. It's got a really nice kind of electric grand in there, but you've also got a regular piano. And an organ. And as you can see, the interface for all of these is very, very similar. I don't really see why they couldn't have just packed it all into one interface, to be honest, but who knows. I mean, the quality is all right. They're good sampled instruments. They're certainly very usable, and with the additional controls, you have quite a bit of scope to creating some more sort of weird things. I can only find a couple of velocity levels, so they're not particularly complex, but they'll do. It's a decent sound palette. Let's have a look at the synth, which looks like they've spent a bit more time on. So what can I tell you about it? Well, it's a standard analog synth. It's got, if we expand up here, you can see it's got 3 voices or 3 oscillators, 2 LFOs, a mix between voices, then you've got your filter, of course. Different types, 4 different types. You've got your envelope. And then you've got a bunch of effects over here, bit crusher, chorus, delay and reverb, which are built directly into the synth, each of which you can adjust the parameters of within it. The controls on these and the acoustic ones are beautifully laid out, so you can just get in there with both fingers, more than fingers, 5 fingers, 6 fingers, and mess it all about. You know, it's like when you play with a hardware synth, your hands kind of sort of fall upon the knobs, and it doesn't really matter what they are. You just start playing with it and you start creating sounds, and it's kind of a lovely touchy and orally exciting experience because you're doing all this stuff. When you go to a mouse and keyboard, or to a mouse particularly, you lose that instantly. I mean, you can drag one parameter at a time and hit a note and see it changing and hear it changing, but it's not anywhere near the experience you get with putting your hands on knobs and sort of moving stuff about. This, with the touchscreen ability, sort of brings a lot of that back. Not entirely, but it's there, so I can start playing and just move stuff about without really necessarily knowing what they're supposed to do. And it's so much more rewarding than using a mouse. So much more involving, so that you feel you're actually part of it, creating the sound and just sort of being creative. So yeah, I think they've really nailed the interface on the electro synth, so it comes with a decent selection of sounds, and it's ultimately extremely editable, that's all you want from a synth. Don't want anything else, that's it, that's what you want. Now, one of the things that sets Stagelight apart from any other iPad app or even Windows app is that it fully supports VST Instruments. So let's have a look. Let's create a new track, an instrument track, and then at the top here you go to VST plugins, having already, of course, scanned my VST plugin folders. And here I've got all the stuff I've got currently. So let's use something like Native Instruments Massive. I add that. And there we go. Now, that might look a little bit odd, and it is a little bit odd because there's a slight sort of incongruency, is that a word? There's a slight disconnect between the scaling of Stagelight and the scaling of the surface, and so the scaling of massive. So you get this kind of container within Stagelight for the VST instrument, which is all out of whack and all out of size. So what we have to do is go into here, go down to 100%. Now everything is tiny, but there we go. Run Stagelight, and now when I load up my instrument track, it looks like it's supposed to. You probably wouldn't want to keep the surface at that sort of resolution all the time. I mean, I find I work with it generally on 150%. So when using VST Instruments with Stagelight, I'm going to have to go back and change it. I mean, it's a bit annoying, but that's okay. I'm British, you know, being a bit annoyed is kind of my normal state. But it's not really Stagelight's fault. In fact, Stagelight gives you this slider here to change the scale factor within Stagelight itself. So you might want to make it a bit bigger once you've made everything else smaller. So obviously VST Instrument GUIs aren't necessarily designed to work with touch, although they can work very well. So this might be where your old pen starts coming back into use. Although Stagelight have given this a little bit of thought, and you have this button here that says show parameters, and within this you have every single parameter for that VST instrument, and gives you faders here which are a bit more touchy, so you can end up editing things in here perhaps much easier than you do in the original editor. And in some ways Stagelight are onto a bit of a thing there. If they could sort of develop that a bit and make it bigger, more touchy, then they're essentially going to be providing a touch interface for regular VST Instruments, which would be awesome. Although you load VST Instruments up on a single track rather than in a rack like you do in many other bits of software, you can use them multi-timbrally. So if I was to load up an instrument track with, say, Contact, I could load two different instruments and have them on different MIDI channels, and then I can go to another track in Stagelight, go to its I/O, and force it to send its MIDI information out to a different track. So here it's sending to its own track, of course, but I can send it out to a different track and force it to be on a different MIDI channel, and that'll allow me to use it multi-timbrally, which is pretty cool. It's a bit clunky, but it's pretty cool. It's there and allows that to happen. So there's sort of the MIDI side of things. I think it would be helpful if you could load up an empty track. I think that would be enormously helpful for external instruments and bits and pieces. It would make it just that little bit more elegant. Similarly, for using multi-timbral VST Instruments to load up an empty track and then route it to it simpler, I think that would be very helpful. Also, if you made the I/O just that little bit more accessible rather than under this menu, you could, you know, you've got plenty of room down here. You could add I/O to tap and sort that out much simpler, I think. So, audio track, let's create an audio track here. This is for, you know, mics, instrument, things like that. We go into the options, we can see what audio options that we have. Here you can select your ASIO driver, which I should point out is again something you can't use in a universal Windows app or on an iPad, is to get the choice of audio driver. So if you have an audio interface like I have here, then you can use the ASIO driver for it. That said, using ASIO for all, the performance in Stagelight is great. It works with that all right, using your headphone out thingy or the speakers. But in this instance, I've just plugged in an Avid Fast Track Duo, which is acting as my audio interface, and that works brilliantly. I can then pick up a guitar, and turn on monitoring. Then all you have to do is hit record. And there's your audio track. If I double tap, it opens up the audio editor, and you can see the audio in all its glory. And here again you can sort of trim it or at least the loop part of it, you have a special hidden menu, again over to the left, where there's actually very little, but there is some. I mean, let's make this a smaller loop. You've got a gain knob. You've also got some pitch stretching. Which is interesting. But that's about it. There's not really any copy, paste, or anything of that sort of nature. There's no trimming or sort of sample editing detail. So I guess it's pretty lacking in that sort of arena. Now, the other thing you have in an audio track is the ability to import an audio file. So let's get rid of this piece of rubbish that I just recorded. And if I tap and hold, it comes up with the Loop browser. Now, the Loop browser is available on any audio track and lists all the stuff that's part of your sound set. So various drums and other things as well. So once you've found something that you like, add it in, and there it is. It's time locked and tempo locked and all that kind of thing. So if I bring the loop back around to here, there you go. I can also import an audio file. So from here I can put in any samples that I like from something else that I have, like so, and it will stick the whole jolly thing in. One thing Stagelight doesn't have is a sampler. The ability to import samples in here is great, but I would love to be able to scatter those across a keyboard and trigger them or play them or turn them into some kind of instrument. So a sampler, OpenLabs, is something that we need, and perhaps that would bring a little bit more detail on the sample editing that's inside the system and that kind of audio processing business. But let's have this loop going as we look at the included audio effects. So audio effects are available over here. Again, you've already got your filter in there. Let's have a look at what we've got. Stagelight effects, you've got an auto filter, auto wah, bit crusher, chorus, compressor, delay, EQ, filter, flanger, gator, glitch and limiter, and reverb. You can also audition them before you load them, which is nice. But anyway, let's bring up something like the auto filter. So, you know, it does what it says on the tin. 4 different types of filter, an LFO to control what the heck it's doing. A compressor, very simple. Now there's a few new ones that come with version 2.1. One of them is a gator, which is quite a nice plugin. It gives you a really sort of easy interface to work it out. You can put in, you know, 16 parts and it's going to chop wherever you put a thing. This also can be stereo and you can affect left and right slightly differently. But the gator is really, really usable. I think that's an excellent addition. Let's pull that out and have a look at another one of the new ones, which is the glitch. Now this is a bit like the gator, or at least it has some gator functionality. But it's a bit more of like a beat repeat thing like you'd find in Ableton Live. Although, to be fair, I don't have any idea what I'm doing. But again, the controls are excellently laid out. You can see what's going on. It's very easy on the fingers. And the new effects are like a couple of dollars each. And they're well worth it, I think. I think they're a decent addition. I guess at this point, one thing that jumps out at me is the lack of a mixer. There's no sort of overview so that I can see you know, what the heck is going on, what effects I've got loaded, and how different levels compare to each other. I mean, in order to change individual levels, I have to step up and down through the different tracks and then change it here individually. I can't see why they couldn't take each of these inspector panels and just stack them up in a line for me, so I can then change things a lot more comparatively. I can see what effects are loaded, I can apply different filter and panning all alongside each other. That to me is something that's really missing, and I'd like to see that in the next version, please. But it'd also be no bad thing to have some sends and some routing and maybe some effect buses, things like that. So a little bit more sort of sonic opportunity to do with mixing, which is the sort of thing that having a mixer interface would bring with it. I mentioned automation before in the piano roll view, but also that's available within the audio track. You've got automation over kind of the things that are in your inspector panel, but also over anything that's in the effects rack. So I can bring up, say, the frequency on the auto filter and have that you know, zooming around, and now that's all being controlled by the automation, which is pretty neat. So up until now we've been talking about the timeline view, but if we poke this little eye icon over here, we then take it to the Loopbuilder view. Now here is your kind of loop-based, sample-based, pattern-based, sort of Ableton Live clip-based kind of song creator thingy. So let's add a couple of tracks. Let's add an audio track. Let's add an instrument track like that. Add another one like so. So we've got a bunch of things ready. What I'm going to do is import a loop into there. So let's find something interesting to put in. Let's do that. And then into this audio track I'm going to add a different loop. I'm going to add that one in. Then up here my pattern play, I'm going to stick in some kick drums, I'm going to stick in some hi-hats and the odd snare. Let's put key lock on. Are you getting the idea? Are you getting the idea already? So you create these little clips and you can paste them about and change them around. So I can take my pattern here, I'm going to copy it and I'll stick it into that one there. For instance, I might move that drum over to there and I'm going to copy, paste that one over there. So now I've got two columns of different things happening. Dead easy, dead easy. I love the way that the wave sort of travels along through the loop as you run it. You have the same controls here as you do in the timeline view, so you double tap something and you get the same editor on the audio, the same editor on the MIDI and the rhythm. So all that stuff is still there. But it's all sort of loop based and very easy to put together. Ableton Live operates the other way around, where you trigger rows of stuff, whereas this looks at things in terms of columns. Is that better? in some ways because it relates better to the timeline view. So rather than everything suddenly coming upside down and your tracks are at the top, it maintains the same kind of layout as a timeline view, but giving you all the access to the loop triggering business thing. One of the new things in version 2.1 is the song mode, where you can specify how many times each column loops before progressing to the next one. So if you tap this little thing down here, loop count, let's make that 2. And then here we can make that loop 3 times. And then we're going to make it go over here to something else. Let's add that in. No idea what that is. I'm sure it's glorious. So if we now run the song, I think. See, now it's moved on. The indication here of how the loop's going around, I think, is really good. Enough of that, I think. So, but that's a general idea. So you can build up and progress and create a whole song in here, which is something remarkably difficult to do in Ableton. And I think where this really wins out is in the clarity of the interface. With Ableton Live, even with it sort of scaled up, you're still trying to find ways of tapping into those tiny little slithery blocks, and trying to hit that record button is sometimes, I find, completely impossible. So the layout, the size of everything in here is brilliant and makes it a breeze to use. I mean, you can also record directly in just by hitting this record button. I could play my guitar. Like so. So very versatile. I mean, the one thing that annoys me slightly is it's difficult to get the differentiation between these two buttons down here and the top. So sometimes when I want to just select a particular loop, I end up hitting record by mistake, and I think it would be useful if they just had a bit more separation there. So perhaps make these a bit more pronounced as buttons, and then I would have less opportunity to hit it by accident. But otherwise, I mean, it's a superly, crazily simple thing. And I can export this as well. If I hit record, I think I can then, let's do that. Let's try that out. That has all been recorded into my timeline, which is genius. There's a lot of opportunity to instantly share your mixes up onto the internet, which is pretty exciting. I mean, it's not something, you know, it's far too sort of casually self-promoting for my liking, but I'm sure it's the sort of thing that kids will love. So let's have a look at the content. Go to the store. Now, because of its sort of app-like nature, Stagelight has an inbuilt store that enables you to buy extra loops, extra sounds, and bundles of stuff. It's definitely worth buying the Electro Synth, I think, to give you better access to all those other controls. The new effects are all here available, the Glitch 6, the Auto Art, Auto Filter, and Gator. Yeah, those are pretty cool too. So, you know, I would recommend getting hold of those. It's only a few dollars. They make a big deal out of their sort of endorsements by Linkin Park and Timbaland, and to be honest, they leave me a little bit cold. I mean, it's a bit like Beats headphones, you know. It's the tie-in with Dr. Dre that actually, for a lot of people, makes them kind of less attractive, because you sort of assume that it's all marketing nonsense over actual quality. So personally, I think Open Lab should focus more on the features of their software rather than banging on about how cool it is that Timbaland's given them a few loops or that Linkin Park have been working with them. Stagelight just come with a whole bunch of lessons which are actually really good. You set them up and it teaches you how to do things within the software itself, which is, I think, really nice. It takes you through things, you tap on it and it moves over to the next step. And it's great. I think that's a really useful feature and worth spending the time in there if it's your first time using Stagelight. Well, the interface really works for touch. All the moving about, the double tapping, the putting notes in, selecting the what's it, all of that, fantastic. Some areas are not as smooth as I'd like them to be. For instance, if I set this loop going and hit copy, there's a bit of a glitch, you can hear that. And then when I try to paste it somewhere, you get the same sort of glitch. I mean, that's not uncommon in these sorts of bits of software, but you know, that sort of thing could be smoother. Performance-wise though, with the Surface Pro 3, it really is rather good. So good, in fact, that you can play the on-screen keyboard without any trouble or particular amounts of lag at all. Stagelight with the Surface Pro 3, you know, seems to be kind of an ideal combination, really. The responsiveness, the performance. I mean, this is on this audio interface running at 256 samples, and even that is good enough. And I could reduce it further down to 64 samples and have it even more responsive. So the performance on Surface Pro 3 is excellent. But performance on another device, you know, may vary. But in this situation, on what we're looking at here, the performance is really very, very good. But of course, you don't have to be running it on a Surface Pro 3. You can run it on a normal desktop machine with a lovely touchscreen like this one. And the performance, of course, may be a little bit different. So remember, depending on your system, your mileage will vary. So there you have it. With most software reviews, you kind of tend to focus on sort of the new stuff, but as this is my first approach to Stagelight, I thought it was worthwhile getting down to sort of the nitty-gritty of how it actually works and what's going on. So this was probably a much bigger review than I initially intended, but well done if you've got to the end. You know by now that I'm generally pretty into stuff, and so it will come as no surprise to hear that I think that this is actually a really good, fabulous, interesting, engaging piece of software. I mean, for me, really, I just love the interface. It's designed right. It's designed for touch, and that works. You know, every aspect of it. I think there's more that can be done, but you know, getting in there with your fingers, it's perfect. It's ideal. It's what you want. That's what it's all been about up to now. That's what I've been waiting for. You know, playing with the electro synth. You know, it's a load of fun. You can get 2 fingers in there, 4 fingers in there, messing around with controls. I mean, what's not to like about that? I can even play the on-screen keyboard and fiddle with knobs at the same time. Yeah, I can. The bundled effects are useful and interesting. The drum kits are a good starting point, but of course once you inject your own VST instrument library into the mix, then you know you can do anything you like. The missing things for me are some kind of sampler instrument and, as I mentioned before, some form of mixing console. Yeah, I find myself having to scroll up and down through tracks in order to adjust the level and the pan and check what effects are loaded up and things like that, and some kind of overview would just, well, it's a no-brainer. It would make the whole experience so much easier. So yes, do that, Open Labs. I'll let them off the step sequencer if they include some kind of velocity lane in the piano roll, and also use more color to express the velocity, and also perhaps just have a switch between note view and grid view like you do on the drum track. Then sure, yeah, you can ditch the step sequencer because the main functionality will be in the piano roll, and that's what I'd like to see. The loss of patterns, the pattern saving and recall, is kind of crazy to me, but you know, they've got to do what they've got to do, and maybe it's something that they'll bring back better later on. Well, we can only hope. But I do love the improvements to the Loopbuilder. I love the wave display thing and the stuff and the song mode and that kind of thing. It becomes a very fun and creative place to play. I'd like to see a bit more finesse with the automation. At the moment it's just a straight line that you put dots into and can move it about. You need to be able to draw a curve or enter a curve a bit more freehand, so you have more control over that. Since automation is absolutely bloody everywhere, then having better control on it would be a good thing. So yeah, I really like it, and at $10, I mean, well, it's there, it's accessible, you can use your fat fingers without having to worry about carrying the pen around or using a mouse and keyboard, and certainly it should be a standard piece of software on any surface. And I think there's bags of room for it to grow, and hopefully it will become even more comprehensive over time. Of course, someone's going to ask the really dull questions like, well, is it as good as Cubase? Is it as good as Reason? Is it as good as Ableton Live? Well, I don't know. I mean, define good, define what it is that you actually want. I mean, I've given you a massive overview of the software and shown you what it can do, and only you really can decide whether that ticks all the boxes for you, is enough for what you want to do, whether the limitations are too limiting, or whether there's plenty in there for you to get your teeth into. You know, it's a how long's a piece of string type question. Can you do more with Cubase, Pro Tools and such like? Yeah, definitely there's more in there, but I think lots of people wouldn't really hit the ceiling in Stagelight, and you'll find there's plenty of room to express yourself, to make music, to be creative. And that's really kind of what we're really after, I think, at the end of the day. And for $10, what can you get for $10? I don't even know what $10 looks like. Shall we call it £7.62, something like that. Anyway, join me next time, because I'm going to be doing some more fantastic reviews, some more stuff on the surface. I've got thoughts I want to offer you about the pen. I've got thoughts about the new Surface 3 that I've been fiddling with. So there's lots more goodies to come. So come and join us, come and subscribe, come and talk to me about this sort of thing. Share your experience with Stagelight, and tell me how wrong I've been and how I've probably missed out the tuner that's probably in there that I haven't spotted. So until then, cheerio.